Yesterday, we learnt the third of three principles. And this is the one related to carrying on Shabbat, which is the theme of the first few chapters of the tractate of Shabbat. We learned the principle that whatever we care enough about to store is a sufficient quantity to be carried out on Shabbat. And if it's not a sufficient quantity that we might want to store it, it's not relevant to be carried out on Shabbat. But the next few Mishnayot then go into different types of things, and it seems to contradict the general principle in the sense that these Mishnayot give specific quantities for specific objects. And this is not unusual, by the way. It's incredibly common in the Mishnah to hear the Mishnah say, oh yeah, here's a general principle. And then when you learn the individual halachot, you suddenly realize that these halachot do not fit the general principle. So just because the Mishnah articulates a principle doesn't mean it's bound by its own principle. Sometimes the Mishnah articulates these things just, if you like, as a way of keeping a mental track of what is going on. Remember that the Mishnah is originally taught off by heart. It's not written down until a long way after it's redacted. So in the beginning, it was taught off by heart, a bit like a human tape recorder. So someone in the Beit Midrash would be responsible for memorizing the Mishnah. And then if you wanted, I don't know, the tractate of Shabbat, you'd say, start on chapter 7, go. And he'd reel it off. So the principle is as much as you care about, but the Mishnah is now going to say something different. Hamotzi teven kimlo pri fara. That kimlo fi para. Someone who carries out straw, a cow's mouthful. Atza kimlo fi gamal. Pea-stalks, a camel's mouthful. Amir is a sheaf, but here it means really ears of wheat. Kimlo fi tale, a lamb's mouthful. Herbs, a goat's mouthful. Grasses, moist leaves of garlic or moist leaves of onion, the size of a dried fig. Dry leaves, a goat's mouthful. All these are the minimal quantities to be obligated to bring a sin offering if we carry them out on Shabbat. And the Mishnah continues, and you don't combine one with the other because all of the different measures are different. You can't combine half a goat's mouthful of herbs with, half a lamb's mouthful, half a goat's mouthful of herbs and half a lamb's mouthful of ears of wheat. It doesn't work like that. But the second part of the Mishnah, having dealt with animal food, is now going to go deal with human food. And human food, we are going to find it does combine. Hamotzi ochalim, someone who takes out foodstuffs. So these are now human foods, not animal foods. Hamotzi ochalim ki grogeret, like a dried fig. This is a classic Mishnaic measure. It's the size of it's the size of a fig that's dried up. And umitzarfim zeim zeh. Hamotzi ochalim ki grogeret chayav. They are obligated to bring us in offering. And they combine with one another because they equal in their standards. And the Mishnah is going to make the qualification chutz. These are all pieces, sort of categories of food that we've learned about in the Mishnah of Maaser and of Truma. This is inedible food. We learned about inedible food. You can't bring it as Maaser. And it doesn't count towards carrying on Shabbat either. These are shells, kernels, stalks, husks, and coarse ground. Suban and mursanan sub and mursan are different kinds of bran you get when you grind wheat. And they don't really form part of the flour. So we are going back, in this sense, we are going back to the principle that it does have to be useful in order to count on for carrying on Shabbat. And if it's not useful, we don't count as part of the measure. And Rabbi Yehuda says, oh yeah, by the way, the shells of lentils are actually food because we cook with them. So we do include the shells of lentils. And then the Mishnah continues. I mean, the boundary between chapter 7 and chapter 8 is not very clear because we are continuing with this list of foods. Hamotzi yain kadei mazigat hakos, someone who carries out wine, enough for mixing a cup. In those days, you wouldn't drink your wine neat. You'd mix it with water. And the classic mixture was basically 3-1. So to get a cupful of wine, you need to get a cupful of wine to drink, you would need to carry out a quarter of a cupful, and then you mix it 3-1. Again, the principle that it has to be useful for someone to be liable to a sin offering when carrying it. You can see this applies now, right? It's a useful quantity of wine you can bench over it, right? That's the classic Mishnah definition of a useful amount of wine you can bench over it. Milk, milk, that's how much you kadei gmia, that's just a swallow of milk. Dvash, kadei litena ala katit, honey as much as you place on a scab. It seems like they used honey as a sort of healing stuff in those days, and I guess it is sterile, so maybe that makes sense. Oil, as much as you'd require to rub on a small limb. Water, enough to make an eye wash. Again, we're talking about minimal quantities here. We're talking about the minimal useful quantity. Obviously, the minimal quantity of water to drink is a lot more than the minimal quantity of water to make an eye wash. We're using the measure of the eye wash because it's the smallest possible measure that can be useful. And then we go back to a general principle, ushar kol hamashkin, all the other liquids, it's a rev'it. It's a rev'it, which is about 86 to 90 mil. It's about 3 fluid ounces, really. And all other kinds of water are rev'it. And Rabbi Shimon actually says, by the way, all of these liquids in this Mishnah, they're all a rev'it. And all these measures, by the way, are only mentioned to take care of the people mentioned in the general principle that we learned in the previous weeks, that we learned yesterday, that if it's important enough to stow away, then it's important enough to bring a sin offering on Shabbat. So Rabbi Shimon would say, look, for normal people, a rev'it is the quantity, but for people who keep special stores, the quantities above in this Mishnah apply. And then we're going to look at different kinds of things. Now we're going to break out of foods into other things. Hamotzi chavel. So what if you carried out rope? Well, again, the minimal quantity useful is what we're focused on. Kedei lasot ozen lakupasam. As much as you need to make a handle for a basket, the word used for handle is ozen, like ear, because it sticks up a bit like an ear on the side of a basket. A reed cord, gemi, a cord out of reed, to make a hanger for a sifter or a sieve. So this is a tiny, tiny quantity of reed cord. Rabbi Yehuda says as much as you need for taking the measure of midat minal lakatan, to measure a child's shoe. And again, you can see how small this is. The principle of minimal quantity still applies. Paper, niar, what's the smallest thing you do with a piece of paper? Kedei lichtov alav kesher mochsin, in order to write a tax collector's receipt on it. And someone who carries a tax collector's receipt is liable to bring a sin offering if he carries it on Shabbat. What if it was just paper that had been rubbed out? Niar machuk. So paper that's been written on, but someone has rubbed it out. So this is basically second-hand paper. Kedei lichroch al pi tzlochit ktana shel palyaton. Enough that you might require if you wanted to wrap it round a small vial of perfume. So those are our 3 Mishnayot for today. Next week, we'll carry on with another list of different kinds of things, which in fact will occupy the whole of the 8th chapter and quite a quantity of the 9th chapter as well. In the 9th chapter, we do a little bit of discursus, but most of the 8th chapter is composed of these quantities, and we'll carry on with those tomorrow.